This is a bar of soap, and this is a wood finish made from soap, and it's one of the most underrated wood finishes out there. It's low VOC, it can be made in your home kitchen, and it's the most silky smooth surface you're ever gonna touch. So I wanna show you how to make this, as well as 2 other deeply underrated, equally low VOC finishes, and how to apply them. So let's go. Oh, I'm gonna need a refill early on this week, huh? So, I was in the shop last night finishing up this sculpture, which, if you've been watching me for a while, you may have noticed has been over there for quite some time. Over a year, because I've just been chipping away at it in my free time. It's a gift for a friend, and now that it's done, I went to go put finish on it, and I stopped. And I thought, this actually might be a really good opportunity to have a conversation about some of the lesser known finishes in woodworking. Now, sculptures, by my admission, don't need hyper durable finishes, right? They're usually kind of soft finishes, something that feels nice to the touch, but doesn't need to take the use and abuse of, say, a dining table. The finishing techniques that I use on my sculptures are furniture finishes. They're just not the ones that are highly plasticized and, they're not epoxies, they're not urethanes, but they are traditional finishes and they have their place in furniture. And as a bonus, they are essentially VOC free. Now, I'm no chemist, I don't understand VOCs, I admit, but they are, to my knowledge, VOC free, and if not, they are very low on the VOC scale. And as we become more aware of what VOCs are doing to our environment and to our bodies, these are things that are becoming more popular again, especially if you're working in, say, a garage or a basement and you have a partner or children. That's less than ideal. So, let's have a conversation about how I finish woodworking pieces with some of these shop-made finishes that you can make in your shop, or even as I did this morning, in your own kitchen, with no worries about the effect of them on you or your family. Oh, coffee. Finish number 1 on our list today is soap. A soap finish is a very traditional Danish finish, and I think it's fallen out of favor, or maybe it never had favor in the Western world. I don't really know. Sweden is in the Western world. We'll say in the States, because it's not hyper durable, right? And that's a fair thing to consider, to worry about how durable is this finish going to be. But I will say, in traditional Danish cultures, that is a finish that has been used on chairs, on dining tables, and even on flooring. So it's not durable, but this is a conversation less about the finish and more about how we perceive wood and its durability. I think we're constantly afraid that if the wood gets dirty, then it's a bad thing, which fair. So we have to seal the wood and we have to put this plastic barrier between the dirty outside world and the pure goodness of the tree. And yet you are finishing it with soap. So even if the bloody thing gets dirty, or if there's a stain, or if there's a water ring, how you fix that is you just take a little bit of the finish and you wipe it back on there, and it both refinishes and cleans it. So yeah, I don't think it's that bad a finish at all. And to be fair, this is the most tactilely pleasing finish I've ever put my hands on, and I've put my hands on a lot. That sounded inappropriate. I can't say I've touched a lot of wood either. Oh boy, I have groped a lot of furniture. Nope. No, this is a kid's channel. All right, let's try this one more again. I've been making furniture for a long time. I have felt a lot of different surfaces, and of those surfaces, the soap finish is without a doubt the most tactilely pleasing of them. So I want to show you how we mix some of this up, because it's very, very easy. I did it in 20 minutes this morning in my kitchen. And then I want to apply some of it to this sculpture so I can show you how easy it is to apply. All right, so here's how it starts. You have a bar of soap, preferably unscented, because nobody wants to smell like a fragrant soap on their furniture. This is just a plain unscented bar of Dr. Bronner's. This is the kind of thing you can just buy at a regular grocery store or department store, or you can order it online very easily. You're gonna take this and you're gonna take equal parts soap and equal parts water and boil it. That's all it is. You can drop a whole chunk of soap in there, but it's gonna take forever to melt down. So instead, you can either grate it or you can just use a knife and chop it up like I did this morning. And so what you're gonna be left with are kind of soap shavings. So 2 ounces of soap to 2 ounces of water, boiled it for probably 15-ish minutes and just continued to add water every now and again as that water level slowly dropped because it was evaporating away, and ended up with a very thick kind of liquid cast iron soap, which I saved an itty bitty little bit of in here so that we can go through how you process it up. Now this has since solidified because there's not very much of it in there, but we can reheat this and I can show you how we then whip it. Because what we're looking for is not a liquid soap. What we're looking to get is this kind of a whipped creamy meringue substance. All this is after I've melted the soap and water together, you just whip it up and it just aerates the whole substance and you end up with this light fluffy stuff. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ghetto woodworking style. We're gonna use a heat gun. A heat gun is gonna be your best friend, or a hair dryer. A good hair dryer will also do. But this is gonna be your best friend when we're working with natural finishes, because natural finishes are either liquid or solid. Very few of them have kind of a runny gel state. So this is gonna help you warm stuff up. I'm just gonna do this for a minute. Hold, please. I've got a bowl, I've got a whisk, and I've got some liquid soap. So we're gonna do that. Now I can take a whisk and I can beat this up by hand, but I'm lazy, so I'm not gonna do that. Ghetto woodworking. This is going to increase in volume substantially. So I'm just gonna drop this in here and I'm gonna start whipping slowly at first, and then as it gets more aerated and thicker, I'm gonna increase the speed so that I'm not just flinging soap everywhere. And then once it gets to a point where the bubbles have become non-existent to the eye and it just looks like whipped cream, and it's starting to build some small peaks, soft peaks, I think that's a meringue term, then we're good. All right, the time has come to put some finish on this bad boy, so let's get busy. I am going to apply this soap finish with a white Scotch-Brite. There is no abrasive in this white Scotch-Brite. It's just a Brillo pad. You can also do it with a rag, or on sculpture, very often you do it with like a brush, a toothbrush, a stiff bristle brush, something like that. So you have options. It doesn't actually matter all that much. I'm gonna take what I have in here and just transfer it to my bin over here. Get a little bit of soap on there. Doesn't take a lot, you know, just enough. And I'm just gonna start applying, just rubbing it on like I would an oil finish with a Brillo pad. Same thing, no different on this. I'm gonna do the sculpture first, and then I'll do the base after that. And that's it, guys. I mean, I wish I could pass this around to you guys like this was a real class, because just handling this object right now, it's so gorgeous to touch. It's just perfect. And you can see you get this really beautiful kind of low luster sheen. That's that buttery sheen that I'm often talking about when I'm looking for in a finish. 10 out of 10, would recommend. On to finish number 2. Now, all you really need to manipulate beeswax into a finish is heat. You could take this whole chunk, drop it in a double boiler, and let it cook down. It would take a while because it's a big old brick. And so in order to speed up the process, what I do is, just like the soap, I'm gonna grate it, or I'm just gonna slice it up. And just kinda, you know, do a ghetto shaving. I don't even know if that's an appropriate term anymore. We're gonna call it backyard woodworking, even though we're not in a backyard. Now, I don't need much, because I'm only gonna do a little bit of finishing. And that's probably enough for right now. I'm going to take the heat gun, I'm gonna heat it up from the bottom so I'm not blowing those chips everywhere, and then we can apply it to this bad boy. Now, applying finish to a sculpture and to a flat surface like a piece of furniture is a little bit different. If this was a piece of furniture, I would take the wax and I would take a Brillo pad the same way that I did the soap piece, and I would just wipe it on and then I would wipe it off. But for this, because it's a sculpture, it's got all of these tiny nooks and crannies which are gonna be difficult to get finish in, and that's again where our heat gun comes into play. I'm gonna take my finish and I'm just going to apply it with a little pad in little tiny areas, little by little, and then I'm gonna heat it up with my gun, and that will allow 2 things to happen. First and foremost, it's gonna allow me to spread that mixture farther, because as soon as the hot wax touches the cool sculpture, it's gonna start to harden. So by heating up the wax and the sculpture simultaneously, it's gonna allow me to spread it farther. But also, and this is more important, I think, what you're doing is also allowing the wax to flow into the pores of the wood, clogging the pores of the wood. You're essentially sealing that surface. And for our purposes as contemporary furniture makers who aren't too worried about the weathering of this piece over time with our finishes, or at least with our traditional finishes, it's going to give you a smoother sheen. It's going to give you a more buttery surface because those pores aren't keeping, how am I trying to say this? Those pores are now flat and smooth, and it's allowing the light to reflect off evenly rather than with just a thin oil. Those pores are just going to soak that oil right up, and it's just going to leave an undulated surface. You can see how this is just leaving a bunch of wax on the surface here. So let's go ahead and hit that with a little heat. I'm gonna turn this on low, and you can see it flash off, and then it's gonna go to melt. And I can start to spread that around, and whatever wax is in my actual pad as well. That wax in the pad is also going to help as I apply it to the piece, because that's going to melt down and make it easier to spread. And that's it. That's the whole game. It's just apply, heat, wipe. That's it. And you can see, like, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous finish, and it feels like it's stickier than the soap finish for sure, but it has a very natural feel to it. The luster is gorgeous, and it smells like beeswax. Like, what else do you want out of life? Now, you may be asking yourself, all right, Eric, that looked like you put a lot on, and that's fair. When you're refinishing this sculpture, you don't need a lot. So that was a bit excessive. But two things. Number one, if you have too much wax on there, it's very easy to remove the excess. You just heat it up, and you take a little cloth or a paper towel, and you just wipe down the excess once it melts, because then it absorbs into the towel and it's off the sculpture. So no big deal. Don't lose any sleep over it. And lastly, I actually usually apply this with a toothbrush, but I didn't have a toothbrush here, so we use this. It worked just fine. And you can see I didn't even use all of the stuff that I melted up. Like, that literally, I did the whole sculpture with just that little bit. So it goes a long way. What I've got here is a very simple mix that I use on all of my furniture. It's literally just beeswax and turpentine that have been mixed in a double boiler to melt the beeswax into the turp. And what it does is it allows you to kind of keep this. It's not fluid by any stretch of the imagination, but it's much softer than the beeswax we just used. I don't need to melt this to apply. I can just scoop it and spread it like kind of a paste wax. But the premise of this video is low VOCs and environmentally friendly, and turpentine is neither of those things. So we're gonna mix up a variation on this that you can use as a complete finish. And all you need to do that is your beeswax and an oil medium. There are commercially available variations of this finish out there. Things like Tried and True is, I believe, just beeswax and linseed oil. So you can just go buy a jar of this, or you can make a jar of it, because learning how to make your own finishes and doing your own processes in the shops allows you to be more particular about the thing you're looking for, whether that be the texture, the consistency, the application, or just having a fresh batch on hand when you need it, which is always nice. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop this in the jar, and then I'm gonna take my heat gun and I'm gonna melt this down the same way I did before. Again, this would be easier to do in a double boiler, but hey, we're working with what we got. This is nice and melted. Our tongue oil, however, is cold. So as soon as I put this in the jar, it's going to start to solidify the wax, which, you know, just means we're gonna have to heat it up a little bit again, and that's totally fine. Again, part of the reason it's easier to do this in a double boiler. As far as a ratio goes, when I'm mixing up my own, I tend to do a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of wax, terp, and oil. And that works really nicely, but we're not using terp here. I'm gonna do kind of a 2-to-1 oil to wax ratio, and that should be kind of exactly what I'm looking for. I'm eyeballing it. Guys, this isn't scientific. This is art. Now again, jar's still hot, been a couple of minutes. I'm gonna tip it this way a little bit though, so I can see roughly how much is in there. Okay, that is actually still quite substantially hot. Tip it this way so I can eyeball it, and then, again, I'm just gonna aim for that much twice. That's all I'm doing. So, yeah, that probably looks about right. Now you can immediately see how this is starting to solidify in there. So we're just going to do the same thing again. I'm gonna heat it up with the the heat gun, and melt that wax into the oil. And look, I cannot stress this enough. You do have hot oil and hot wax. Just don't light it on fire. You know, if it's smoking, stop heating it up. Now, everything looks good. The wax is all melted into the oil, so we gotta give that a few minutes to cool. You could apply it right now while the wax and oil are hot to allow it to penetrate deeper into the material. That is a very viable technique. That's a fair thing to do, but just be aware this is probably too hot to touch, and we all know that hot oil and skin don't play nicely together. So wait for it to cool at least a little bit so that it's warm to the touch, but it's not going to burn you. Fast forward a couple of minutes. All I've done is taken this jar and run it under the cold water for literally 3.5 minutes. I have the timer going. We've gotten it to a point where it's exactly the consistency we want it. Not a lot of it here. Obviously, the more volume you have, the longer it's going to take to cool, but eventually it will, and eventually it will look just like this, just the kind of smooth, creamy consistency, light in color. Now, one thing I do want to point out, the color of this is a little bit lighter than the color of this for two reasons. Number one, this is still a little bit warm, but also I used oil in this, and this is just simply beeswax and terp. So that's going to be slightly lighter. Now, the consistency should be the same. I can't get my bloody hand in there. How am I going to get that out? We'll do the old popsicle scoop. All right. Now, all we're going to do is buff this onto a piece of wood. This is a little bit thicker than I would normally like it. So maybe I needed to add a little bit more oil. It's still nice and soft. It's nowhere near as hard as just straight beeswax. But in the future, I think I just didn't do quite enough oil in there. So probably maybe a 3-to-1 ratio, or maybe just what I poured in wasn't quite a 2-to-1. Both are perfectly possible. It's almost exactly what I want, but I want it a little creamier than it is right now. And that's it. That's the whole thing. I mean, look at that surface. It's gorgeous. And it is essentially no VOCs. Now, again, I don't know if tung oil technically has VOCs, but if it does, it's very low. So, friends, there you go. 3 environmentally friendly finishes that are not only underrated finishes, I think, but also just genuine delights to have a tactile experience with. So don't undersell these things. You got your soap, you got your wax, and you got your oil wax combo. They all have a place in furniture. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Now, a couple of things before I get out of here real quick. Number 1, I have a Patreon. So if you guys want to join a fantastic, vibrant community over there, get more access to the things I'm doing in the shop, behind the scenes footage, and early access to ad-free videos, you can check the link in the description for that. I've also got some merch over on Bonfire, so you can check the link down below to get some dope t-shirts if you want to support me that way. And I also have a new podcast where I talk about all things design and creative process with my 2 very good friends, Mary Sy and Paul Jasper. It is a phenomenal little podcast where we dive deep into all kinds of things that are not typically woodworking podcast related. And as a forewarning, I do use profanity over there.
What's your profanity? Right, I'm sorry.
I keep it off the channels where the kids can watch and learn, but over there, it is, I mean, we're taking off the gloves and we're going punch for punch with a couple of heavyweight designers. But for now, it's time for me to get out of here so I can go give this to my friend. I can bring this back home, and I guess I can mix up some more of this because no doubt I'll use some of it in the future. So friends, go get in the shop, go make a thing, and try to enjoy it if you can. And until next week, cheers.